Hey guys, it is Wingy here and welcome to another of my Doctor Who top threes. Today, based on the attire, obviously we're talking Colin Baker. All jokes aside, of course we are going to be talking about the 12th Doctor, Peter Capaldi. Now, I previously have spoken about my least favourite Capaldi stories, and fuck me, they're bad. But the 12th Doctor does have some very, very good stories, and today I thought I would talk about some of my personal favourites. Some I've spoken about before, some I don't think I have really, but either way, let's get into it. As always, this is just my opinion. If you happen to disagree and whatever, who cares? And again, as always, this is in no particular order. I'm just gonna say my favourite three, and there you go. So starting off then, I want to just talk about the Lake story because I often talk about the Lake story when I'm talking about the Peter Capaldi era. So I just want to briefly cover that one and then move on to the other two. Under the Lake Before the Flood, barring one thing, which I will talk about, is essentially everything that I want from a modern Doctor Who story. It feels like classic Doctor Who again. Now, whether that's because it is a base under siege story and the monster is big and rubbery, I don't know. But either way, I feel like this story is really clever in its execution. I think it looks great. I think the cast is great. The concepts in this story, I think, are really, really strong. Out of all of Peter Capaldi's stories, this is probably the one that I revisit the most. And I think that is a major factor when you're talking about some of your favourite and least favourite stories. It doesn't matter necessarily how good or bad a story is, but if you want to keep coming back to it, that's got to mean something. And obviously the opposite as well. If you never want to see it again, irrespective of how good it may or may not be, that's telling as well. But thankfully with this story, I definitely want to come back to it. Like I've said in videos before, I love the fact that this story plays around with time travel. I love the fact that part 1 is set in the future, part 2 is set in the past. Clara is actually enjoyable in this story. I don't think that she's overbearing or annoying or anything like that. I think she just feels like a Doctor Who companion and is the Doctor's friend. She doesn't feel like she's taking over like she does in quite a few stories in Capaldi's era. I think his performance in terms of Peter Capaldi is very good. I love the way he delivers his lines. I think he's very witty in this story. He's very doctory in a more traditional sort of sense. I love the design of the ghosts as well. I think they look really cool, and even though it is a bit of a generic cop-out cliffhanger, I really enjoy that as well. I remember when I first saw it, I was like, oh, actually, I'm very interested to see what happens next week. However, there is one criticism, like I said, and that is the big rubber monster, which is the Fisher King. Now, apart from the fact that it's voiced by the dude from Slipknot, Corey Taylor, is it? I'm not a Slipknot fan. He's probably not even from Slipknot, I don't even know. But either way, apart from that, which is cool, and the design is pretty cool, the monster's a bit of a letdown. It doesn't really do a lot. See, in a story like this, I quite like it when the villain barely appears because it sets the atmosphere and the tone for the story. Whilst that is the case in this story, when the monster finally does appear, it's a bit sort of underwhelming. Like the Fisher King just sort of stands there, witters on a bit, and then gets drowned. Like, alright. So yeah, the end of this story is a little bit underwhelming, but apart from that, everything else I think is fantastic. Next, we're going to be talking about a story that, again, I think I've spoken about a few times, but again, it's really grown in my estimations, and that is Into the Dalek. This story really surprised me because I remember when I first watched it, I was like, whatever. It was just, you know, it was one of them stories. It was like, you watch it, fine as you're watching it, but you don't really have that desire to come back to it. You don't really think, oh, if I want to watch a Doctor Who story, I must throw on that one. It was never like that. In the last few years, that's probably changed for me. This is now one of my go-to Peter Capaldi stories, and like I was saying before, rewatchability and that desire to watch it again is a huge factor. I think for me, this is one of those stories in the same vein as Genesis, now bear with me on this, in the sense of, if you don't look at it as a Dalek story, alright, Daleks are in it, and yes, Dalek is in the title, but it isn't really a Dalek story. Now the difference is with this one, apart from it being not as good as Genesis, but Genesis is obviously about Davros, you know, it's a Davros story, it isn't a Dalek story. This, whilst it does have more Dalek stuff in it than Genesis did, this is a Doctor story, which is actually quite interesting from the perspective of you're looking at these two major players in Doctor Who, obviously the Doctor himself and the Daleks. And it's sort of like they're looking at each other and finding those similarities, and especially when this is early on in Capaldi's run and we don't really know who this Doctor is yet, and he doesn't really know who he is yet, and he's a bit darker, he's got a bit of an edge to him now, and he's even questioning himself. He does it at the very beginning of this episode, in fact. It's quite an interesting perspective when you think, actually, the Doctor is quite similar to the Daleks in some respects. I think this story definitely works better as a modern era story. I think in the classic series this story just wouldn't have worked, but with the perspective of the Time War and everything else, this story works so well. Again, I love Peter Capaldi's performance. I think even though this is in the early stages, so he is a bit darker and edgier, like I said, he still has that humour, but it's a bit of that darker humour as well. And there's even moments in this story that I think are genuinely like, what the fuck? The moment in particular, I've mentioned it a few times, is the moment where he gives a guy that thing when they're actually inside the Dalek and he gets killed. And it's one of them where it's like, did the Doctor know that was going to happen? Was it an experiment? Was it a distraction? Either way, like, that's pretty fucking cold. But moments like that really add to this incarnation's character, and I really appreciated that. Plus, there's some really great looking Daleks in this story. Now, I know that they're the typical bronze ones that we've seen before, but I mean, the way that they're shot, I'm pretty sure there's model shots in this, but like when they're roaming down corridors, it really reminds me of the classic series, Resurrection in particular, and I don't know why. I don't know if it's just my own mind thinking that, or it genuinely is like a throwback, I don't know, but let me know in the comments if you can kind of see parallels in terms of the way the Daleks are shot in certain scenes with any other Dalek story, because I certainly picked up on it. Rusty as a character is quite interesting as a concept for a Dalek. It was a character that never needed to come back again. I mean, he did, but he didn't need to. But in this episode, it was quite interesting, and I also like the fact that it adds a little bit more lore to a Dalek war. Like, these people, they're all fighting Daleks, and actually, I think the reason why I'm thinking Resurrection is because they do reference stuff like Dalek duplicates in this story. So yeah, I think this story works in the whole pantheon of Doctor Who, but it is definitely a modern style story, because I don't think you could have this same story talking about the darkness within the Doctor and you've got fucking Patrick Troughton stood there. Well, actually, no, maybe you could. Davison, no. McCoy, definitely. I'm going off topic. Anyway, Into the Dalek, I love it. I think it is just brilliant. I think it is just one of those stories that flew under the radar initially, and then over time has just gradually got better in my mind. And then last but by no means least, we're going to be sticking with Series 8 and talking about Mummy on the Orient Express. Again, a story that I always liked. Like, I did think this was one of the better ones of Series 8, but it was never like, yes, I must go and watch that story. Now, again, it is turning into one of my go-to Capaldis. Out of the three that I've spoken about, this is probably the one I'd revisit the least, because I have the biggest issue with it in the sense of the stuff with the Doctor and Clara and Danny Pink and that sort of triangle and the drama and everything. Like, I really dislike those moments in this story. And after Kill the Moon, whether you like that story or not, I don't. The repercussions of that, I do not think are handled well, and those moments are handled incredibly poorly within this story, which without it would probably be one of Capaldi's best, easily. And to me, I think it is one of his best, but it would be even better if it just, you know, ignored all that baggage. The mummy design, I think, is fucking petrifying. It's such a good design, the way that it lurks about, and I also love the fact that, as a concept, this is a monster that only appears to people who are about to die in, like, what is it, a minute, something like that, just under. Oh yeah, the other thing that I really despise about this story is the fact that it's on the Orient Express, but it's like flying through space. That's fucking stupid. If it was just on a normal railway line and they still did that, you know, switch thing where it's like, oh, it's technically not a real train, this is just like a distraction type thing, that would work just as well. That's just a little nitpick though, because I can live with it. Frank Skinner in this story, that was an interesting one. Now, his character admittedly didn't go in the direction that I thought he was going to, but there's a few moments where you're like, are you a bad guy? Like, I can't tell if you're a good guy or a bad guy, because you're kind of lurking around corridors here and acting a bit suspiciously. It's like you know something. Does he know something? I don't know. I don't even think the story properly addresses that. For all we know, I mean, there was speculation, there always is, someone who's somewhat suspicious in the background. Oh, it's probably the Master. It isn't. But, who is he? Is he someone a bit dodgy? Is he not? Is he just a friend? I don't know. The set design is actually really good as well, and I really like Capaldi's outfit in this story. I like sometimes when the Doctor just gets dressed up, you know, wears a similar outfit to what they typically wear, but it's a bit smarter. You know, obviously David Tennant, he had his tuxedo, Matt Smith had a similar thing, and this is sort of Capaldi's version. I think it works really well. I also really like the cigarette case that's full of jelly babies. I also love the resolution to this as well. Now, I don't always typically like the whole, actually they were a good guy all along, but I feel like it worked a lot better in a story like this because it's the whole thing of, it's a soldier who hasn't been told that the war's over yet, and I thought that was actually quite a clever solution. Like, this isn't someone who's doing this because, like, this mummy isn't doing it because it's just like a mindless zombie. But it also again shows off how clever the Doctor is, because the Doctor's got like, what, 40 seconds, 50 seconds or something like that to figure everything out, and just keeps talking, hoping that the answer comes to him. That moment is really, really tense, and I love Capaldi's acting in it. And so they are my personal top 3 Peter Capaldi, aka the 12th Doctor stories. In the comments below though, guys, let me know what you think. Do you agree with my choices? Do you disagree? Whatever yours are, let me know down below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you leave a like on it, subscribe for more. Social media and Patreon links will be in the description as always, so if you'd follow me on any of those things, I'd absolutely love you forever. But until next time, guys, you take care of yourselves. Goodbye. Just as an FYI to anybody who's still watching and was like potentially waiting for a blooper or anything like that, some of you might be asking in the comments, oh, what about Heaven Sent? What about World Enough and Time? The following parts are a bit shit, so that's why, you know. I mean, you could say that Heaven Sent is a standalone story, but it does go into Hellbent, which is never going to be in my best 3. World Enough and Time, on its own, probably top 5 in a new series, but it goes into the Doctor Falls, which is, yeah, not great. So yeah, that's why. But I bet you there'll be people who will still say, oh, where's Heaven Sent? Where's World Enough and Time in the comments, having not watched this little bit at the end of the video. Or maybe you did. Are you Frank Skinner, like suspiciously watching till the very end to see if there's anything else? I'm just babbling now. See you later.